Hello, these are recordings of classes conducted at a world-class residential recovery centre here in Armidale, New South Wales. My name's Hartmut Günther and I'm fortunate enough to be able to facilitate these classes. So I hope you enjoy them. The more you engage in something, engage means you think about something, you might say something, you might ask a question. What will happen is when you engage, you're selectively focusing your awareness, but also you will create within you more of an ability to remember what we talked about, what was said in the class. And then you will have more of an ability to reflect and think upon those things that were said in the class. If you don't engage, you're still okay. You can listen, obviously. That's an active process. But I'm just saying there's more of an opportunity for all of us if we engage to reflect upon and think about perhaps a little bit more deeply than we've ever thought before about certain aspects that come up. And some, not all aspects, but some aspects will be more relevant to you. So it would be useful to think about those things and reflect upon those things. Okay, so let me bring up some of these slides again, and I've just managed to well, let's just start with this. What does awareness mean to you? And this is what we did last week. So I'm not going to repeat this and ask you all to repeat that, but we are evolutionarily adapted to be able to selectively focus our awareness. So it's one thing to have awareness, but to be able to focus it is a quite unique and sometimes challenging aspect of ourselves. It's an enjoyable, active process that requires effort, practice, and presence. So don't let those words put you off, effort and practice. Our survival, in many ways, depends on it. So I'm going to ask you a couple of things about this. Now, to be aware, this is just a general umbrella term. What does it mean to be aware? So these are some of the aspects of what it means to be aware: to believe in something, to know something, to perceive something, to experience something, and to remember something. Now, if you look at those things and add those things up, and I'm not saying this is an exclusive list by any means, but it's pretty interesting because it consumes most of our daytime waking consciousness. So to believe something and to know something, I wrote those two things down because sometimes people think those two things are the same thing. Anyone like to suggest, maybe just starting with you, Dean, what is the difference between believing something and knowing something, if you think there is a difference?
I think there is a difference.
Mm-hmm. Can you qualify that? Like, what might be the difference between believing and knowing?
Just thinking. I think a belief is something that doesn't have to be based on facts. I think a lot of people can have belief systems which aren't factual. Whereas I believe to know something is based more on facts. Proven facts. That's what I think the difference is.
Okay. Graham, anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, it's probably perhaps to believe in something is, as Dean said, it doesn't have to be proven fact, but more of what do you call it? She's interested in something.
That's very good. Yeah. Sometimes we want to believe something is a fact or true. Maybe it's not.
We religion's a classic example. Some people, yeah, they can't prove it, but it's a belief. It's something they have a vested interest in. Yeah, I don't know.
Yep, well, that's pretty good. Michael, do you think beliefs can be harmful?
Oh, it can be, yeah, sure.
In what way?
If my belief system is negative, it can be harmful to myself, be harmful to others.
Right. What do you mean by your belief system is negative? What do you mean by that?
Okay, say self-esteem. If my self-esteem's low and I'm feeling horrible, it can affect my actions, it can affect others' perception of what's going on with me, how I act with them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're linking your beliefs in with your self-esteem. Is that what you're saying?
Not necessarily. I believe that it can be fact or fiction, a belief system.
Yep.
As in Graham just mentioned.
Yeah.
But also a belief that I can do something, that I can be positive and I can do something and achieve something is a belief until it's done.
Yeah.
But then it comes to know something after the fact because I know I can do it then.
Yeah.
You understand? So
that's really, yeah, that's really good. That's really good. I find that really interesting that you're linking belief systems in with, in some ways, feeling good about yourself. You might, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you might even be saying that you use a belief to get you to a point where you know something about yourself.
yeah,
Like you believe that you can lift 100 kilos at the gym on the press, but you've never done that before. So you don't really know that. But based on what you believe about yourself, you may then set out to verify that belief by actually going to the gym and maybe working up to it, hopefully slowly, and going that way. Does that make sense? Is that what you were sort of saying?
yeah, to a certain extent. I was also in regard to like my life when I was a child, what I believed when I was growing up, to the belief system of how I saw the world was a false belief system.
Right.
You know what I mean? It wasn't fact, and it was something that was, you know, there that affected how I acted. And now I'm aware that that belief system isn't necessarily fact unless I make it a fact.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Probably explain.
Yeah.
There's like scenarios.
Beg your pardon?
I say that I can put lots of different scenarios to that
Yeah.
belief.
Yeah.
Something, knowing something.
Yeah. And sometimes you mentioned when you first said that, sometimes the belief system can be harmful. I think you said to someone else, but in the same way, having a false belief can also, of course, be harmful to yourself.
Yeah.
That it can limit you from moving forward, or it shuts you down to other possibilities that may exist, but you believe that those things don't exist, for instance, but you haven't actually taken the time to actually verify whether they do or not. And when I mean by something that exists, something that is good for you, something that is useful for you, you know, if you've lived in remotely and you've been off the grid and all of a sudden you have no food, and you somehow walk out and you reach this town and you say to the person, oh, I don't have a job, I don't actually have any way of feeding myself, and this person says to you, well, the government has a support structure and it's called Centrelink. I know that's a bit taxed at the moment, stretched at the moment, but you can get help. Now, if you believe that that is complete nonsense, you won't avail yourself of that help. and you may become homeless and end up virtually starving and all that sort of stuff. That's an extreme example of holding on to a belief system because for many reasons, and not verifying it at least, or not making the effort to verify it for yourself. Anyone else want to say anything else about that? Knowing and belief? I'll say one thing about that more. You can be talked out of your beliefs. You can't be talked out of what you know. Might not have thought of that before. If you've stuck your hand on a hot plate at some point in your life to find that it burns you and you pull away quickly, there's no one on the planet that's going to talk you out of you knowing that. Whereas before that happened, and probably your parents might have told you that they would have said, well, the hot plate is going to actually harm you and burn you. And you might incorporate that and believe that because you respect your parents, you know your parents. But that doesn't, there's still a difference. And a lot of kids are like that. They will actually stick their hand in the fire or on the hot plate anyway, just because they're little scientists, amateur scientists. So yeah, there's a real difference between belief and knowing. What does it mean to perceive? Go on. Who was that? Graham?
No.
Michael?
Yes, it
Dean?
was me. There's only three of us. With that, what about the people that walk on fire, walk on hot coals?
Good one.
Not going to
What's
Is that
that?
fact or fiction? Is that fact or fiction?
Yeah, right. Anyone else want to comment on that before I put my 2 bobs worth in?
I believe there's a scientific explanation, which is that the state in which the coals are at when they actually walk across them. And it's been proven that if you run across them, you'll burn yourself because of the pressure that you'll put on the actual coals. Whereas if you've walked on them, and I think that they burn to a certain degree and stabilize the ground, when you walk on them calmly to the other side, it might hurt a little bit, but in reality, you don't get burnt.
Like running in the rain as opposed to walking in the rain. You get more wet if you run because you're collecting more raindrops as you run through.
Now, while you're both saying that, I was thinking, well, I could believe what Dean and Graham were saying. I really can't comment on it because I have no idea. I'm fully aware of it. I've seen it, but I have no explanation for it. So what Dean was doing in particular, and Graham as well, was giving us, he was using science to some degree as a means to convince us that there's some scientific basis for that. So
Actually, I start to believe.
What was that?
I said at the start, I believe.
That's right. That's exactly right. But I was actually looking, I was trying to be aware of what was going on inside of me. I was trying to feel, could I go into a space where I believe what you believe? You know what I mean? And you were using your powers of description there. So I just find that interesting because that's exactly what happens in the world. And like I said before, you can be talked out of belief, but you can also be talked into it. So do I believe that they actually do that? Yeah, I do because I've seen it. But how they do it, and I could take in some of what Dean said there, but I don't know. I think I'd want more proof because, yeah, just because how I am, and also to qualify what, you know, Michael's asked that question. Well, do they actually get burnt, those people, or do they put something underneath their feet to help them not get burned? Is it mind over matter? Is the mind that powerful that it can actually prevent someone from actually being burned? Because it's really a law of the universe. And it's interesting you brought that analogy or that example up because we were talking about hot plates. I got burnt just recently from virtually a microsecond encounter with the top of in my oven, the little bar there that gets really hot. Mate, that was so intense, only from a second, less than a second exposure. I think I had a 3-degree burn because it took that long to heal up, and it's just healed up now. So anyway, I don't know if that made you any clearer, Michael, or you were just wanting to have a discussion around that.
I was just throwing it out there.
Okay. What does it mean to perceive something? This is about being aware. So, anyone?
Subjective. A perception is your perception of something. It's like colors in the world, I guess. People are colorblind. People see things differently. So my red might be my perception of red, but your red might be your perception of red.
Yep. That is very good. Very, very, very good. So it's also, you've just raised the point, Dean, of that there's an actual difference between what comes into our senses, and you're talking about eyes at the moment with colors, but we've got ears, we've got heat and cold senses, we've got taste. So what comes in contact with our senses may be objective on the outside. In other words, something may be red. That apple may be red. And the reason it's red is because of a physical law of the universe. In other words, light falls on it, and the only light that is reflected back off it has a wavelength equivalent to red light. Now that light, then you see that and it comes into your eye, and that is your sense. So there's a sense, there's two parts to perception. One is the processing of the actual light. The second part is what Dean was talking about, that processing that happens at the first sensory junction, which is the retina of the eye, then gets passed into the brain. And what happens in the brain is way, way, way more complex. And it takes in, so perception takes into account other things. Dean was using the example of actual color blindness. But there's also other things like if all of us were asked to describe a tree that was outside in the courtyard there, you'd probably find that we're all describing it in different ways, and yet you have the same sensory input. We have the same sensory input. So our perceptions are, when we're aware of something, it's useful to know that what you're perceiving is, as Dean said, very subjective. This gets into a whole thing with forensic science and criminology and all that. When people are asked to describe what they saw when there was a violent attack or an accident, a car accident, people usually end up describing different things because their perception is influenced by what is going on in them at the time of their sensory input. I know that was a bit techie, but it's useful, as Dean said, to be aware that what you're perceiving there may be gaps in regards to what's actually happening out there in front of you. Anyone want to comment on that? Meaning you can be as aware as you like, but it's nice to be aware that your perceptions are also vulnerable, particularly to your own emotions, your own memories, your different life experiences, and all that sort of thing. To experience something, obviously. So, to actually eat that apple yes, you're tasting it, but you're also having an experience. So experience is part of awareness. Experience leads to you actually, well, a multiple of things, both to all the things that we've actually just spoken about. And the last thing I've got down there is to remember something. So, and I touched on that when we first started speaking, to be aware of something, then, and if you engage in it, and if you are focusing your awareness through listening or through looking at something, then you've got a greater chance of remembering it. So you can shut down all your senses. In other words, block them out, sit in a darkened room where you can't hear anything, and you will still be aware of your memories, which is an interesting thing. So it's a whole world there within inside of you. It gets really interesting when you try to start writing things, by the way. Just two more slides. I mentioned last week I wrote a couple of pages on this, and I've synthesized it into just these two paragraphs. This is one paragraph, and the next slide is another paragraph. So if you could think about this and give some reflection, that would be useful. So sometimes I become aware of this thing called superpowers, and I'm sort of juxtaposing this against all the superhero movies that are pretty much flooding a lot of the media and things at the moment. So I thought, well, and they're all crazy stuff, you know, like being able to set your arm on fire and fight someone and do all sorts of things. But to make it more real, according to at least what I know, to be aware you have superpowers. So this is a really useful thing to be aware of, like choice, self-control, recollection of consequences. That's using your memory there. Ability to selectively focus awareness, which is called attention, externally, while learning, which can be happening right now, recognizing danger. Hopefully there's no one roaming around the building doing weird, nasty things. Reevaluating goals, which is happening every day for all of us. Sometimes things work, sometimes things don't work. Making decisions and optimizing survival and personal circumstances. So we're using our superpowers like choice, self-control, our memory, and our ability to selectively focus our awareness. And when we do that externally, so instead of things coming in, you're focusing your awareness out into your environment, just like you're all doing right now. You're actually focusing, paying attention to what's being said. In some sense as well, you may be experiencing distraction or interference, in other words, from your own thoughts. Oh, what Hart's saying, well, I don't really agree with that. I wish he'd get to the point, blah, blah, blah. So there's stuff going on sometimes in there as well. There may be external distractions. Someone might start playing loud music, or the guy might come and start mowing the lawn in that little courtyard out there, which has happened while we've been doing meditation sometimes. So those things happen, but we have these superpowers like choice, self-control, our memories, and the ability to selectively focus our awareness. Any comments on that? Anything you don't agree with or agree with, or think that that's just remarkable?
No comment.
I guess I'm asking you to reflect upon these things as superpowers, because sometimes you might look at them as a burden or oh God, do I have to make a choice? You know, Do I really have to control myself in this situation? Oh my God, I better think of the consequences of what I'm about to do. And I'd rather just be drifting off in my mind, thinking and dreaming about what's going to happen in 3 months' time, rather than selectively focus my awareness in this particular moment. So that is one other extreme, that there obviously then you don't look at those things as superpowers. But I'm just being so bold as to suggest maybe they are actually superpowers. Maybe by exercising these things and practicing them, it might actually change in some ways the direction of our life and make things in our in a survival sense, which you've already done. You know, if you've decided, well, I'm not going to partake of this particular substance anymore because it's certainly not optimizing my survival by doing that. So you've already done that. But also our own personal circumstances, like the quality of the home we live in, the sort of food that we eat, the relationships that we engage in, all of those things are consequences to some degree, or flow-ons from our ability to exercise these superpowers. There are other superpowers, of course, but I've just sort of broken it down. I thought I'd break it down into external and internal. So the next focus of our awareness is a similar thing. I'll read it out. To be aware you have superpowers. So to be aware, I'm asking you to be aware that, or at least entertain the possibility first. Maybe I'm asking you to believe that you have superpowers. And if you put some of this into practice, you may come to know you have superpowers. So, to be aware you have superpowers like the ability to selectively focus awareness, again, attentionally, this time internally, while letting go, feeling, being reset. I'll describe what that means in a moment. Letting your needs resurface. That's really important. Remotivating with infused clarity. So you've fallen into a bit of a rut or a bit of a hole. You know there's something you want to do or should do or could do, but you don't have the motivation. So remotivating with infused clarity and imbuing consciousness with ebullient feelings, joy, and appreciation. I wrote over a page on this and I've synthesized it down into this one paragraph. So the reason I said that is because there's a lot here. I'm just asking you to consider some of these things. And some of these things you may not have either thought about or in actual fact actually experienced in your life. And that's how it works in life. There are foods that you have not eaten yet. It happens. So there's more to come. There's more to know about ourselves and ourselves in relation to our world. So anyone, before I go into anything there doesn't make sense? I'm sure there must be something. Anyone?
I've just got a question about ebullient. What's that mean?
Thank you, that's one.
Ebullient.
Ebullient.
Ebullient. A great friend and mentor of mine who was a lot older than me and wasn't even naturally English speaking, but he made the effort to learn words. And one day he used that word and I asked exactly the same question, or I actually looked it up in the dictionary. Ebullient means joyful feelings infused with something that's uplifting, something maybe the antithesis or the opposite of feeling sad or depressed or anxious. Not those things. Feelings that you enjoy feeling, and without getting into the subtleties of what you can feel, because that's a personal realm as well. But ebullient feelings, you might say, are uplifting. That's probably the best way I can describe it.
Thank you.
Anything else there?
Yeah, what you were saying before about being reset.
Reset.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's use, if you don't mind, please forgive me for this, the analogy of a computer or a mobile phone. In the old days, it used to be video players. In other words, any of those technological devices can, for no apparent reason, refuse to cooperate, right? I'm sure you've all experienced that. So, you know, you use your phone every day, blah, blah, blah. You go to play your favorite song in your thing there, you go press play, boom, it doesn't play. Or the app that's using to play that song or that piece of music is just frozen. What do you do?
Update.
That's right. I mean, you could throw it in the bin, but most of us don't do that. So usually you restart it, right? You can't even update it usually until you so you just shut the whole thing down. So one of the natural ways that you don't even have to be conscious about that you're reset is to go to sleep at night. You are literally reset. In other words, you wake up, things have happened during that period, both physically and mentally and emotionally, where you are de-scrambled, not re-scrambled, but you, by the end of the day, I'm sure we've all felt it. It's just like, whoa, what the hell was all that about? And then you process to some degree that stuff during your sleep. But you can also do that while you're awake with your awareness. So you can reset yourself by selectively focusing your attention internally. And for want of a better word, practicing something like meditation, which is what we do. We haven't done it for a couple of weeks. That's because there's been a lot else going on. But maybe next week we'll do that. Usually I've replaced the video with our meditations there. But of course, you can do those meditations on your own. So without just saying this is all just about meditation, because that is a nebulous term. There are so many ways that we can talk about and describe that. But this is really about going within. What does that mean to let your needs resurface? Michael?
Needs resurface.
Yeah.
Well, I'm presuming it's not your basic needs, air, food, water. So I'd say it's emotional needs of being comfortable with yourself and resetting that feeling, stuff like that. I presume, I don't know really.
Well, like I said, this particular, everything that's written here is imbued with my bias. And bias, I don't mean that in a negative sense, I mean my own experience. So I've written this down because this is what I've actually experienced. So let me put it this way. Letting your needs resurface. Sometimes, our needs are overwhelmed by what we want. I really want to go and buy this. I really need, or I think I need that new car. I really want to make more friends. I really want to go to the movies. I really need to go to the movies. So sometimes our needs and wants are intertwined and we get confused with those things. Another thing is that on a day-to-day basis, you are getting messages. We are getting messages from this world that are defining our needs. They're not your needs. They're the needs that are being defined for you by this world. So how do you get some respite from that? How do you know what your actual needs are? That's a powerful question. That's why I've got it in bold there, needs. I'm not providing answers here. I'm just suggesting that that is worth giving some thought to, if that makes sense. Does that make sense, Michael?
Yeah. It does, and it's a common thing I've recently.
So
questioning, you know, what's the reason behind stuff?
Yeah. And what this is another way of saying, when you become aware and focus your awareness internally, it's sort of like, and that's what this little audio that I'm about to play sort of touches on a lot as well. It's like, well, what about me? Sometimes, you know, people have been described as going through a midlife crisis. It's like, well, you know, that has a negative connotation. It means that you can't function properly in the world. But it's useful to connect with that aspect so it's not so devastating on a more frequent basis. Am I just going along here? Am I just a leaf in the wind? Am I just floating on the surface of a river and just letting it take me where it ever wants to take me? Or do I have some part to play that I can actually play in my life? And one aspect of being more aware of that is to be able to find out what's going on within us on the good side, and on sometimes, as we went through last week, some of the thoughts and feelings and emotions that don't feel so good. So one last thing, and then we'll finish with this. What's the difference between awareness and consciousness? Anyone? Give it a good shot, someone. Wild stab. There is no right or wrong answer, by the way. Hey?
I was going to say, we're all conscious to a certain extent, unless we're put under the influence of something or knocked out for surgery.
Yeah, that's right. Well, consciousness is sort of implying that you're already conscious, right? You're not under the influence of something, or you're not unconscious. So what I'm suggesting here, consciousness, we don't know what consciousness is. Before I start saying anything, I'm not here saying we know what consciousness is. But one thing that I have experienced and become aware of in my life, and I know, is that consciousness is malleable, and to some degree, it's changeable and responsive to where I selectively focus my attention. For instance, if I watch an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie and everyone's being killed, there's 100 people being killed every 3 minutes in the film, as opposed to being selectively focusing my awareness, say, these are extreme examples, of going for a walk in the pine forest or down at Turmeric Dam. Those two things, and I might do those two things for 2 hours each, those two things are going to imbue my consciousness with something without even quantifying or saying what it is. And I will feel different. I will be perceiving things differently from those as a result of those two experiences. I will be thinking differently. The thoughts that come into my head will be different as a result of having one of those two experiences. This I know. This is what, and so you might say, well, that's interesting. I can feel myself a certain way. I can feel myself responding to my partner or someone else differently as a result of having done one of those two things. That's interesting. So that's what I mean by consciousness. You might say it's the sum total of all our awareness and something else that's hard to define, although I've just tried to give it a good shot based on experience.